Hey, Melanie. You're muted. So you're a co-host, so you should be able to share your presentation without any problems.
We will share. I'm just trying to get him to get rid of the background.
Do you need some help?
Ask him.
You see the stop video in the bottom left hand. There's that little caret right next to stop video.
Yeah.
Go to choose virtual background.
Yeah.
And then you scroll up and there's a thing that says none.
Yeah.
I hear two of you, but apparently I only see one of you because of the background.
Melanie's hogging the screen.
You just don't show up, Rick.
Yeah.
None.
Yeah.
There
it is.
Yay! Okay. Oh, you have to get close to me.
Got cooties now.
Yeah.
Do we have an IPM for that?
And then hit the record button in 1 more minute.
Okay. Let me.
Do you go to the bathroom again before we get started? Because you only got a minute.
Just trying to get a 13-pound orange cat out of my face. No.
Put the lid on it. Is there going to jump up there?
It doesn't work.
No.
All right, I have 7. I'm sure we have 20 on right now. I'm sure a few more will catch up in the next 5 minutes, but in the interest of time, we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you, everybody, for coming to the latest session of Gardening 101. Tonight is a really exciting session on composting as the weather's starting to warm up. You all will probably be ready to jump out and get ready your own compost pile started here in the next couple weeks. So this is a really timely topic. I'm going to introduce Melanie Files and Rick Lowman. They are 2 of our master gardeners, and they are masters of everything. They're also master composters. So they do this class on many different levels and many different capacities. So you're going to get the 1 hour and 15-minute abridged version of composting this evening. So I'll turn it over to Melanie and Rick.
Thank you very much. And we'll hit share screen, I think.
Yes, you can go ahead and share your screen.
Slideshow.
Yep.
Yay!
Perfect.
Who's going first? You or me?
Go ahead.
Okay. Okay. Please note this says enrich your garden with black gold because that's what most folks call compost. And this is me, Melanie Files. And this is, ta-da! This is Rick, my cohort in crime. Housekeeping, if you please hold your questions or put them in the chat, and then we'll do those at the end because I'm afraid if we get stopped in the middle somewhere, we'll get off like I have a tendency to do, and then we won't get back on track in the time we have left. I like cartoons, so this is one of my favorites from Hillary Price.
And I usually mow the scissors when I go to mow the lawn because she's left them laying out there somewhere.
Almost. Compost is is a lot of things to a lot of different people. They call it all kinds of things, but mostly what it does is it's organic material, meaning things that come from your kitchen or your yard. It is mostly used to enrich the soil. That's the key phrase there. One of the very first books I ever had, a man named Stu Campbell, which there's a reference for him at the end, he called it a fertilizer. And a lot of folks say, well, yeah, it can be later after you get your garden up and going, and you've done this for a while, but usually most people use it to amend the soil, not to necessarily fertilize it. Composting, when people say, oh, I'm composting, well, yeah, we are, because it's the process of doing what nature does normally. We are just hurrying it up. We manage it, we accelerate it. If you go out in the woods or any place that's been undisturbed, you will see that everything is decaying, composting in situ, in its site. Why should you compost? Well, there's two, I looked at this two ways. One, what I call Save the Planet. This is where you're giving back everything that you've taken out of it, putting it right back where you can use it for your garden. It reduces the waste runoff into watersheds. That has become a really important thing, especially around here. All the waste stuff that runs off gets into the watersheds, and we're trying to eliminate that as much as possible. Reduces the organics material. What that means is it is the grass, the leaves, the things that come from your garden. Those are the organics. You try to keep those out of the landfill. You want them back in the land. And for me, this is my story of the sink disposal. The plumber wanted to put one in, and I said absolutely not, because what I want to do is put everything that would go in a sink disposal out into my compost pile. Why should you compost? This is for Save the Plants. The past one was Save the Planet. This is Save the Plants. For all of us, when we worry about watering the garden, whether you have a system in place or like me, I use a hose, compost helps increase what's in the soil, makes holes. And if you listen to Emily on soil, the water holding capacity of the soil is real important, so the roots can get down in there, so you don't have to water as much. It allows for more organic growth, which means that it decreases commercial fertilizer use. And it encourages these microorganisms that we can't always see. They're bacteria and fungi, and they help the roots absorb the nutrients that are already in the soil from, of course, your compost. And it improves soil aeration. A way to think about this is if you think about your fingers being plant roots, how easy is it for you to ram your fingers down into, then you could, make yourself eat it, of course, an angel food cake. It wouldn't be too hard. But try to do the same thing with a big thing of sourdough bread. It's not going to happen. So when you're improving the soil aeration, it means it makes it easier for the plant roots to get where they need to go and suck up the water and get all those extra nutrients. This is probably one of my favorite slides. The 1.3 pounds per person, there's a little asterisk there because some places it'll say 1 pound, some places it'll say 1.2. 1.3 is, I take the high number on this one. This is the average amount of food waste per person per year. That's just for one person, just one. And you can multiply that by the number of people in your household. The number can be rather staggering. The yard waste, this is a high number, especially if you live in a little bitty place. You're going, I don't have 230 pounds of yard waste. Well, if you have a 5-acre lot, you might have more than that. So this is the average between all of us on large and small places. The average total, and this is a scary number, 704 pounds per person per year of food waste and yard waste. This is what I meant by the organics. This is what you want to keep out of the landfill and process it back into your compost pile and your yard and your garden. There are a lot of ways that people refer to composting. One of these is cold, which is what we use. This is where you just add new materials as they're available, and then you let it sit, and it can be, compost pile can be any size, any shape. Rick will show you in a little bit all the different kinds of compost piles that you can make. I like cold because I don't have to do a whole lot of work with it. This is what Rick does. This is where you add all the materials at one time, and they have to be in a proper ratio and a proper size and all of that. And again, Rick will show you how to do that. He makes it look so easy, and it works, and the compost is just gorgeous. Benefits of a cold pile: you don't have to worry about the temperature. In a hot pile, you do. You don't even worry about that. Don't even look at a thermometer for it. Earthworms and other microorganisms are not harmed. That means that the temperature is not up high enough and it doesn't kill anything. And there's less or no turning required. Some people, I do at some times, but you don't really have to unless you want to. Low maintenance. I just walk out there, put stuff in my compost pile, and walk back in the house. I'm a lazy composter. A hot pile. The layers here can reach 40 to 100 degrees Fahrenheit. And this is where you really need a thermometer, because Rick will show you again how you have to sift things around. Weed seeds are killed. If you get that pile up to 160, well, 130 according to some of the experts, you'll kill any weed seed that's in there. You destroy a lot of the pathogens. That means the icky stuff. It's fast decomposition. You can have a compost pile in 4 to 6 weeks. You can actually have compost. It's a very effective use of space because you have it only confined to one little bitty spot. And it works best in warm weather because in the wintertime, it's going to get cold from the outside towards the inside. It's all yours.
Thank you very much. Outdoor composting, which is what most people do, and there's a lot of different methods of doing this, which we'll go over. And this is the worst example of composting that you can see. There's so many things wrong here. I could spend most of our time going over it, but I want to show you a bad compost pile, and then we'll talk more about it. But the main thing here with this, besides being unsightly to your neighbors and even yourself, it also can be dangerous to pets and other critters that would
I have to take a cat break.
that can actually get in and eat some of this material, and it can be actually be deadly particularly for dogs. So, but it also, stuff like this will attract other critters, foxes, skunks, and in some areas bears. So never want to have anything that looks quite like this. You can make a bin, and there's different things that you can use: concrete blocks, straw bales, pallets. You can use like snow fencing. Almost anything that makes a container can be used to make a homemade bin. You can also buy commercial bins. There's, again, all kind of varieties of the different types. We'll show you a way that you can get one of the bins that's on the left side of the screen here is available, and we'll show you that at the very end of the show. The square bin in the center, really doesn't matter whether it's round or square. The ideal bin is going to be 3 feet cubed to do the most efficient composting, but a little bit smaller than that is not going to hurt. The other thing with any of these bins, they can be either hot or cold. It doesn't have to, just because you have one of these, you don't have to do a hot bin or you don't have to do a cold bin. So the bin is just the container that you're doing your composting in. There's also tumblers. The one on the left side is a large tumbler. We make a lot of compost and holds a good bit of material. They do have some disadvantages that when they are full, they can be fairly hard to crank. There are some like this that come with motors, and these are more expensive. Then there's smaller tumblers. The ones on the right side are ones we got several years ago at Costco. and do work very well. There's other similar ones, and any of these bins that you purchase, you can find at any of your big box home supply stores, online, at a lot of your even plant books that you're getting in mail now from all the different seed and plant companies. Most of them have a section where you can get compost bins. Bins and barrels. Make your own bin. This is a three compartment bin, which is a progressive bin that you start on the one side. When that gets full, you move it to the middle. When the original side gets full again, you move the middle to the end and just keep moving them down. And by the progression, you're actually turning and mixing up your materials and speeding up the composting method, which we'll talk about a little bit here shortly. You can actually use a garbage can to do composting with, and you drill holes in it so it gets air, because air is a very important process in the composition method. And you can use bungee cords. This is actually a friend of Melanie's, a neighbor a couple blocks down from us, that took a garbage can and drilled the holes, uses a bungee cord. You can actually put it on the side and roll it around to sort of tumble it so you don't have to get in to stir it up. You can also, in your garden or yard, you can do what's called pit or trench composting. These are our raised beds, and during the off season, we go in and dig our compost in and work our way around through the bed. Or you can have a trench. Some people, if they don't have raised beds, they'll actually have a trench so that there's a walking path, a trench that they're putting compost in, and a growing line where they're growing their vegetables in, and they just keep rotating that through their garden. You can also go out, if you don't have a garden but you want to compost, you can do the same thing around your plants, in your landscaping. Even if you lived in an apartment complex or a condo or something where you don't have a garden, you could still compost with permission to dig the holes and bury it. You can do that. This is our coal pile that we inherited when we bought this property. It was stacked higher than what the tops of the posts are, with you name it and everything, including deer parts. People we bought the house for, the gentleman was a hunter and dumped his leftover remains in there. We found some pretty good size, like say a whole deer femur, I guess it probably was. But the key to doing the coal pile, they will draw worms from the yard, but you can add additional worms. Melanie goes out at this time of year. You'll notice the first couple of spring rains, you'll see worms crawling across your driveway, your sidewalk. She went out with a knife and a cup and started picking them up and adding them to the compost bin. And the stick there, as we work our way through it, every time we put something out there, we mark where we put it with the stick and just keep rotating. And by the time we get back and forth to the end, till we start back at the beginning, you won't find little, if anything at all, of what you originally put there, because nature is going to break it down. And that's what the cold composting is, just letting nature do its thing. When you're locating a pile outside, you want to make sure it's convenient to you. So as close to the garden or kitchen as you can get. Though ours is as far away from the house because that's the area that was not yard or already part of the garden. You definitely want to be close to a water source, a rain barrel ideally, but hose or something so that you can add water if you need it to the compost bed, because it will dry out in dry spells, and that'll essentially slow down or stop the composting process. It can be either in the sun or shade. You do want to watch that if you're in an area with too much sun, that can increase the drying out of the garden. So sometimes you may want to cover it Being in the shade doesn't hurt. Main thing is you don't want to have it up against a building, primarily because of wood, in case you do get critters crawling up into the house or the building. Some cases, some areas you could get termites, and that could become a problem. And you definitely don't want to have it anywhere near your downspouts, because that's going to add additional water and heavy rains, which is going to make the compost bed too wet, excuse me. Appearance depends on where you live and the way you want the compost, and also what your HOA covenants are. Again, you don't want that first pile I showed you. That's so bad in so many ways. Again, I could take the whole program just telling you about that. But I have a cousin lived in an area with a HOA covenants that it couldn't have a compost bin, and she's been composting since shortly after she moved in, because she got one of the square bins like I showed you in that picture, painted the color of their air conditioning units, and it sits there, and you wouldn't even know, if you were the next door neighbor, you wouldn't even know it was there. So however you can deal with it, a lot of ways you can hide it, and we do cover stuff like that when we do one of our longer programs. It again, depends on how pretty you want it. Going to start by go through quickly by setting up a hot pile, because that's what I do, and that's the quickest way to produce compost. You can do it as little as 4 weeks. On a residential basis, it's probably not going to happen that fast. Commercially, where they have larger piles and machinery to do the turning, you can really do it really quickly. This is the steam rising off on a cool morning coming up off of the compost pile, which shows that the compost is working. To start with, you're going to take a few corn stalks, sunflower stalks, sticks, or anything like that at the bottom. Cleaning up your garden, you're going to have in the spring, you'll have a lot of sticks from plants that hopefully you left up for the winter, for the birds and critters to get their seeds off of. This adds aeration and also drainage to the bottom of the pile. Then you're going to start layering. Your first layer on top of that will be a layer of leaves, and then you alternate with what we call green and brown leaves, straw, newspaper, shredded cardboard, anything that in that category is in the brown category, grass, food scraps, anything like that can use to make your green layer. And you just alternate those up. And you're going to water each layer as you build it. You want to make sure that it's damp, but not so wet that it's soggy. You just want to keep it damp. And you'll read some places, there's a lot of different books and everything on composting. Everybody has their own particular method and thoughts. Some people do say add a shovelful of garden soil to every other layer. The concept behind that is it adds more microbes into the composting, but between what's naturally in the leaves and the grass, that's already going to be there. So you really don't have to do that. One thing you don't ever need to do is go out and buy what they call compost starter, because all you're doing is essentially buying compost that somebody's selling you a small jar of it, and you're supposedly add critters to it that you don't. That's just a waste of money.
Yeah.
And again, I mentioned about covering. If you're in an area where it's going to be really, really hot and dry for a while, or you're going to have an extended rain, say you started your pile or have your pile working, and you have know there's going to be a long period of rain, you could cover it up to keep it from getting overly wet. Your finished pile, you can see the alternate layers here. Now, to speed up this pile, what I've learned to do over the last few years since I took this picture is, as I do each layer of greens and brown grass and leaves, I will mix those up before I start the next layer, and my piles look more mixed up, and that just speeds up the composting process. And when you start your pile, we have compost thermometers, which are about 2.5 feet long, so they penetrate well into the pile. Commercial composters have their thermometers like this are going to be 4 feet usually long, so they get deep into the pile. But your pile the day you started, which is what I have here, is going to be about whatever your ambient temperature, which was right around 80 degrees. Within 24 to 48 hours, you're going to watch that thermometer. You can almost watch it go up. It moves surprisingly fast and will get up just usually right under 160 degrees. Rarely, I don't think I've ever had a pile actually go over 160. It usually pegs at about 158, and that shows that the composting process is working. Then you turn it. When you start seeing, if you don't have a thermometer, you can tell when your pile drops down somewhere about a quarter or so that's the process. But also, if you have the thermometer, you'll see that the temperatures drop down, and you want to make sure that you turn it by the time it gets to 100. If you let it go below 100, it's very difficult for it to start up, because after you turn it, it'll start going back up again. Your second turn won't get quite as hot, and usually ideally you'll turn it 4 times. And by the time you turn it the 4th time, you'll see there's virtually no rise in the thermometer. You also notice that almost everything is broken down that's in there. The leaves and grass will be less distinguishable. And what you'll have is a pile like you see here, where I've taken the 2 bins, the 2 empty ones on left and right, and put them into one and let that rest for several weeks, or even I let it sit for the whole year, so it's completely broken down. And what you have in the end is what you call the black gold. Now you will see some few leaf particles, maybe some stems that got in there that don't break down, or some root particles. It's okay to spread those in your garden and your yard, however you're going to do it. Melanie does like to sift that out and put that back into the pile, and just use the real fine material when she puts them into her garden beds.
Things that are considered acceptable to put in your compost pile: shredded paper, cardboard, paper towels. The shredded paper, you need to not add, if you can add a little bit of the glossy paper, but not a whole lot, because the glossy paper's got more clay in it. Eggshells, please crush those up. The earthworms will thank you, because this is part of their fiber. We all know how important fiber is, especially the earthworms. We did have in our original compost pile here, the cold one, the folks who've been here before left one section that had, I believe, probably 24 eggshells, and they had not been in this house for 3 or 4 years, and those eggshells were still intact. Grass, make sure you have pesticide and herbicide free. Don't get your neighbor's grass, excuse me, if you know that they spray it. Just avoid that, like the bubonic plague or COVID. Yard and garden waste is acceptable. Hay and straw are fine. And a lot of folks have said, oh, don't use hay because it's full of seeds. It depends. I have a friend who gives me hay from their cuttings, spoiled hay, which means it's been left out, but it's the second cutting. So there's very few weed seed in there. Food waste, this is a good thing to put back in there. Manures from herbivores, that means things like horses. I can't even talk tonight, I'm so sorry, excuse me. Horses and cows are fine. Bunny rabbits. Coffee grounds, yes, definitely. Tea bags, it depends. I'll show you on the next slide why I say it depends. Liquid from vegetable cans and cooking. I mean, you can pour it down the drain if you want to, but just pour it in the thing you've got sitting by the sink. That's just some extra water that you won't need to put in your compost pile. Dryer lint and pet hair. We are blessed with 4 indoor cats that shed like mad. So their fur can actually go in a compost pile. Unacceptables, and there are some in this list that are debatable, and we'll talk about that. Coal and charcoal, these do not break down. And if you have used charcoal, that some of this stuff is Kingsford that has the lighter stuff in it, please don't put that in your compost pile. Sewage sludge, there's some issue with this because we have a lot of vitamins and hormones and things that go in and then out and then down the toilet, and that stuff will still stay there. Glossy or wax paper, even though it's wax, you really will have to just throw that away. Pet urine and feces, there is a book that I have that the guy says, don't throw this stuff away. It can be composted. Doesn't necessarily mean you're going to put it around your tomatoes and peppers, but you can put it around, if it's composted properly, it could be put around your shrubs. Meat, I compost little pieces of meat, and I have a boneyard that's one separate compost pile for the bones and things. Meat, we're not talking about you throwing away or trying to compost a 5-pound roast. Little pieces of meat can be thrown in. You'll see my blender here in a bit. Mostly because people don't dig it down far enough. And so then the critters are going, oh, look here, I smell pork chop. Grease, oil, and fat, these can also be done in my blender in small amounts. But for most part, if you feel uncomfortable with any of these, don't do it. That's the thing. Human waste, it's called humanure, and there are places that use this. We don't in our country, but people do use this because it's a high nitrogenous material and it can be composted. Now the artisan tea bags, if you have tea bags that are called artisan, they're special hoop de la, and you open up the box and the next thing you know, you are facing a bag with tea and the bag is nylon. The nylon will not decay. I've had tea bags that I've saved that I threw in the compost pile. Let's just try it and see what happens. And then I go back in a year and boom, I still have nylon tea bag. Bags, most tea bags have some kind of plastic additive added to the paper. And this is a list of the ones that do that. Red Rose, Tetley, Twinings, and Bigelow. And I called and Bigelow said, well, the 40 count bags, I'm going, what is the difference here? You've got two 20s, but they said they were going to change it so the 40 count were acceptable. Bags that do not have the plastic additives. Organic India, Celestial Seasonings, Tizo, Bigelow, the 20 count, and Berries, which is an Irish tea. Equipment, these are some of the things that we use. And I started out doing my composting things, learning from a woman, a master gardener. She said she had a blender that she kept underneath her sink, and that's where she put her scraps. Well, if I put it under my sink, that would drive me crazy, so mine's on top of my counter. But you need some kind of container for scraps. Sharp knife, simply because you need to cut things up and make them smaller. A shovel or a trowel, this is to help you dig things in, no matter whether the trowel is being used between shrubs or the shovel is being used in a cold compost pile. A multi-tine fork, this helps you pick things up and move them from spot to spot. A mower with a bag. Look out when the leaves come in. Rick is out there with throwing leaves in the yard, mowing them into small pieces. But it just makes it so much easier to use the mower, the bag. A wheelbarrow, that's to be able to tote things. A water supply, because you have to water your compost from time to time. Even in the wintertime, it's helpful if you add extra water as you put things in the compost pile. And heaven to Murgatroyd, as they used to say, that's what you need the most. Because compost is not made, unless you are doing a hot pile like Rick does, it is not made that quickly. Mother Nature's going, what are you all doing? Slow down. These are the optional things. a blender, which I have. I'm on my second one now. A kitchen knife, scissors that makes things easier to cut up. If you are doing, some people prefer, even in a coal pile, a PVC pipe with holes in it that aerate, because again, like Rick said, you need air in your compost pile. A chipper shredder and or a machete. Be careful swinging that machete. Sifter screen, Rick built one for me because I'm real particular about what goes in my garden beds. And as you can see on the left, I'm sorry, in the thermometer too, for a hot pile. This was my first sifter screen that Rick built for me, and I used it so much, and the wood was kind of thin, so I boogered it all up, and so he had to make me one that's heavier with 2x4 pieces. Yes, it is not falling apart, let me tell you. Whatever I sift that's left, the pieces that are left on top, I throw them back into the coal pile so they can go back and do their thing again. To help waste become compost, this is really important, even if it's a coal pile and it takes longer. Size matters. Chop up that, whatever it is you're doing, chop it up. If you've got to use a lawnmower, or if you use children, don't give them the machetes, but you know, let them bounce on those dry leaves a lot. I'm sure they will just go, I can't do that. I'm sure if you've had children, you know, give them a pile of leaves and they'll have a good time. Use a variety of materials. This is really important. You could use just leaves or just grass, but you wouldn't have a compost pile. You'd have a bunch of leaves and a bunch of grass. Keep your pile moist. If it is too wet and too soggy, it's not going to work and it'll end up being a stinky mess. And you can aerate using that multi-time fork or holy pipes, layers of sticks, whatever. And this is mostly for hot piles because you will do this while you're building a coal pile. You'll have all kinds of sizes of things that will help the aeration. And for the hot piles, you need to check the temperature like Rick showed you there. And again, give it time. You've got to give it some time. Okay, this is, before we had the backsplash, this is my $20 Black & Decker blender. This one, bless its heart, it died this year, so I had to go find another one, and I actually got it on sale. It was a $20 when there was a coupon, so I got it for $14.99 plus tax. The bucket is where I put things in there that I can't chop in a blender. That means tea bags, a paper towel. If you want to throw in some cat fur, that's fine too. Things that you normally would, I found with a tea bag one time, I thought, well, I'll try it in the blender. Oh, that did not work well. But anything that you can chop up in the blender, again, size matters. The smaller the pieces, the things, it's great. And this is my smoothie. So once it is, we don't use this blender to drink anything, trust me. Once it is chopped up, you pour it into the bucket and it's easier to carry it out to the compost pile. And these two things sit on the counter all the time because if it's, like I said, if it's underneath there, I'll forget it's there. So if it's out there where I can see it, I see when it's full enough, I can blend it up, when I've got to take it out. And I don't keep the lids on them. And the reason I don't is because you keep the lids on them, you're making anaerobic conditions, and then you have a stinky kitchen, and that does not work well. So, but we only put the lids on if you have, oh, good grief, cauliflower. When you cut up the cauliflower before you blend it, it is really kind of stinky, so you can put the lid on. Everybody gets upset, oh, I can't do that because of the fruit flies. Well, here is the way to take care of your problem. I call this my fruit fly catcher. You can also use a medicine bottle, because I use a medicine bottle now because I put it on top of my windowsill right next to my compost pile and my compost bin in the kitchen. These are your ingredients: a small amount of lemon ammonia, a couple of drops of dish liquid, some water. Set it up there and the fruit flies will go, oh, look here, isn't this nice? And they will die for you. Okay, indoor composting methods. People do this inside. This thing is called an electric tumbler composter. It was called a nature mill, and I have one of these. Truly, my cats bought it for me. You're going, your cat? Yes, my cats bought it for me. This one, you do everything inside the house. You can actually put this thing outside, and we did this one year with the one that I have. But well, let's just see. It says you can do this outside. So of course, being a retired science teacher, why not? It is made of like a foamy thing on the outside, so it is impervious to weather. You dump everything in the top, it grinds it up, it cranks it up to 160, and things drop down into the bucket in the bottom. The cool thing about this is that you can do, again, chop things up, cut it up and put it in there. And according to the advertisement for this and you can go online and look at this. This is about 1/4 of everything they tell you. What they say for this one mostly, this is different than the one updated one. This is updated. The thing about this is they are mostly trying to steer you towards pet waste composting. This thing will compost the pet waste and the biodegradable bags that you put it in. And then once the whole process is finished, you can take this out and put it around your shrubs. And it does accept, if you see the last part, accepts meat, fish, dairy, food remains, pet waste, blah, 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 blah. Don't put the pet waste stuff, even though by that time it should be okay. Don't put it in your garden, put it around your shrubs. It makes a little noise, but it's not anything irritating. So it's just different. And notice here it says suggested location, outdoors, shed, or garage. That's if you're doing, cat poopy or dog poopy. It can be used indoors as a food composter. Do them separately. That's the trick there. This is for worms. And this is a standard picture of when people try to start their worms in a blue bin. I don't know why they're always blue, but they're blue bins. And you can order worms from a commercial dealer, or you can do what I do. We moved in here and the neighbors were wondering about what moved in the neighborhood when I was out with my cup and my knife getting worms out of the driveway in the street. But I put mine out in the compost pile because this is the only kind of composting that has not worked for me. A lot of people, including one of our master gardeners, swear by vermicomposting. And I tried it, and the worms and I came to the conclusion that they would prefer to be someplace away from me. They were trying to crawl out of the bin. I couldn't get the food right, couldn't get the water right. But if it works for you, please do it this way. This actually works. Instead of using one of those really big fancy machines that you pay a couple $100 for, you can go over to Home Depot, get a couple of buckets, a couple of lids, and then you can do this indoor bucket method. And it does work. I put these two, one on top of the other in the corner of the kitchen in the wintertime, and it just simply works because here's what you do. After you fill the buckets 1/3 and 2/3, you cut up any of the scraps, drain off a lot of the water because you don't need that much water for this one. You add the scraps to the bucket, mix it up. You can cover it loosely or keep the cover off if you want to. Folks have said, well, I can't do that because one of my cats will get in there. Ours never bothered it. And I did keep the lid kind of cattywampus on there just so I could keep a look at it, lift the lid up and take a peek and see if it's getting too dry. You also check to see if it's dry, then spritz it with water, stir it up a little bit. And whenever I take the soil, this is soil from different places in the yard and the garden, I always end up with a couple of earthworms. They just come along for the ride, and that's fine. If you don't like the worms, then take them back out and drop them over your porch. And you repeat until the bucket is about 2/3 full, and then you let it rest, and then you start on the next bucket. This is a system that the Japanese developed for indoor composting, and I use that term in quotation marks for this reason. It is not composting. This is anaerobic fermentation. For those of you who make pickles, or sauerkraut, this is what you're doing with a bokashi. And it requires a proprietary mixed work. That means it is molasses, bran, and a special kind of bacteria. And then you add it to this bucket. That's their proprietary mix there. And you notice there's a drain hole at the bottom. So as this stuff is fermenting, instead of being like when you do at home with pickles or something, you can skim things off the top. You're supposed to dump this stuff out or pull it out of the bottom. Then they say you can water it someplace. And I'm going, I don't think so, because I'm not going to pay that much money for this proprietary mix. Then when you're finished with it, when the proprietary mix and all that stuff has been fermented, then you have to take it outside and compost it. So to me, skip that and just do it right in your yard. This one is kind of cool. I need to talk to my cats because I think I would like to have one of these. It's a chopper dehydrator that sits on your countertop. And you do everything, dump everything in there. And it is not a composter. It simply chops everything up, dries it, cooks it. And then you can put it around your plants, but you need to dig it into the soil. It's just dehydrated food. It's not exactly compost, but at least you've not thrown anything down the sink disposal. But this is really cool, but I will tell you, it's really expensive too. I need to talk to my cats. Your turn, my dear.
Okay, thank you. Go over some outdoor problems that we have, and I'm sure there'll be some questions at the end because we've covered some of these things pretty quickly to get through, because we actually do a 3-day program, 2 evenings and all day on Saturday, that really completely covers composting, and that's program is provided by the Berkeley County Solid Waste Authority. And usually it's in June. We're waiting to hear from them whether they'll be able to have one this year. We didn't have last year because of COVID, and not sure what the status will be this year, but that's something to look forward to. And Melanie just informed me it's going to cost you $40, but with that you get the really great Rodale composting book, which is Bible, and that's mentioned in our handouts that Emily has available for you, and it'll be in our references at the end of this program. So here we go with the outdoor problems. Almost always people that have never composted or anything, as soon as they hear the word compost, if you did a word association and said compost, the first word that comes to most people's minds is going to be stinky. Compost pile, if it's stinky, the only stinky pile you're going to run into is that one I showed you at the beginning that had all the stuff thrown around on it because it's not being mixed up and chopped up properly. So usually if a compost pile is stinky, means that you have too much green or nitrogen material and not enough brown carbon material. So you have too much grass, too much organic material, like
Excuse me,
sorry.
cat problem.
Melanie just had a guest presenter here join us. That you've added too much kitchen scraps or something at one time and not getting enough mixed, and have too much, not enough brown or carbon, which is your leaves, your shredded paper, shredded cardboard, straw chopped up. So if it is, if you do have it this way, you can take it the other way by, again, adding some type of part of the brown category. It could also be too wet. We mentioned that a number of times. You get too much water when you're building a pile, or you added too much wet material, or you've had this long rain and your pile's not aerated well so that it drains. That will also contribute to it being stinky. And also being too compacted. That's why you want the pile aerated and be able to stir it up, mix it up. When you turn it, particularly, again, if you're going in the hot pile, that's the one thing that happens when you turn it. You're getting more air in it, aerating it, and reducing the compaction in the pile. Now, you build a hot pile and you have your thermometer in there like we showed, and it sits there and maybe goes up to 110, 120, but doesn't get any more. Very likely you didn't get enough moisture in there when you were building the pile. So you can add moisture. It could be too compacted, same thing. It has to be aerated. You have to get air into the pile. Or you have too much brown material, you don't have enough nitrogen. So just the opposite of being stinky, you're going to have to add more green or nitrogen material. And then occasionally some people have noticed winged insects around their bins. Now there are some normal flying insects that you're going to see in a compost pile. They're part of the process. There are insects that get in and that are beneficial insects that you do have, but usually if you're seeing some of these winged insects, the reason is you have too much green or nitrogen material that's drawing them in. And it also could be that the pile's a little bit too wet. But usually it's too much nitrogen. And again, when you have that, the too much nitrogen, you just offset it by adding browns, getting your pile balanced out. There's some beneficial larvae when you get, particularly if you're doing a cold pile or when you're turning your hot pile at the very end, that you may run into some very large larvae in the bin. And these are size of your little grubs like you'd see in your garden grubs, your lawn grubs, or your Japanese beetle grubs. These are really large. And what they are, they're the rhinoceros beetle, and there's hundreds of different varieties of these. Some have almost look like a dinosaur or a rhinoceros because they have a great big shield on their back end of them. People in some countries actually keep them as pets, but they are good because what they are, they're part of the last process of breaking down material, particularly woody. Quite often you'll find them if you have a pile of mulch that's set over the year and you go back and start digging into it later on, you'll find a lot of these. And just toss them off to the side into leaf pile or something, they'll bury themselves back in because the rhinoceros beetle is actually a beneficial bug. It's not a pest that's going to harm your plants or cause any problems. 3 rules of composting is use the materials you have on hand. That there's a lot of, not everybody has everything that you need, particularly if you say leaves and grass. I go out, I never have enough leaves in my yard because we get a lot of wind and all our leaves end up about 2 or 3 blocks away. So I go down in the fall and collect leaves from the neighbors that put out bags and bags and bags of leaves for the garbage that ends up going to landfill, and save those and use them throughout the summer when I have grass. But you can use sticks, straw, anything that you have. And keep trying to find a system that works best for you. Some people, they'll try a hot pile and it doesn't work and they say, well, I'm just not composting. Don't get frustrated because even a hot pile that doesn't work, if you let it sit for a year, it's going to do its job because nature is going to compost on its own. So if you can't, if you want to try hot composting and it doesn't seem to be working for you, just go to the cold composting method. Same thing, it doesn't matter what type of bin or container you have, whether you make it or buy it, learn how to use it. You might have several stumbles. Our first purchase compost bin was the Earth Machine. And the first time we tried, it worked perfect. I mean, it just, we got, in a little over 2 months, we had this beautiful compost. Built the next pile, didn't do a darn thing. Sat there and nothing happened. So we had just had too much carbon in it and had to learn how to use it. And over the years, we found different ways, and we try a lot of different ways of composting. So find something that works best for you. And again, that magic word, please don't be impatient. It will, composting will happen whether you want it or not. It's going to eventually happen. And that some of the things we didn't have time to cover in here, the little blue dots down in the corner are the handouts. If we were doing this program in person, we would be handing the handouts to you now. So you'll have a lot of the information, including the resources that we'll show you here at the end that Emily will send to you.
We're at the end.
And we are. Here's the references. And again, Emily will have a reference sheet for you on this. It'll have these, some great books that tell you a lot of different things. And these are some good web references. And
Yes.
this is what I mentioned earlier, the composting bin. This is Frederick County, Virginia, right down there at Winchester. And that if you call them, they have, at the time, they had an excess of these, so that you should be able to sign up if you're interested. Our local solid waste used to do this same program where you could buy the water rain barrels and the compost bins, and they actually, that's where we got our first Earth Machine from. But they had to stop that because of you had to buy a truckload, and they just couldn't sell enough of them to justify doing it. And Melanie wanted to say something.
Yeah, you don't need to call. What you need to do is go to the FC, Frederick County Recycles.net. I called the woman and said, because it says for residents only, but then it says in the surrounding area. So I called the woman, got a delightful response, and she said, well, of course you can. So I have one. I mean, I've had you have to go down and pick it up in Stevenson, but that's just right down the road. It's $50. Normally, if you buy this thing from Home Depot, it'll cost you $109 plus shipping and handling. So this thing it's a change from the Earth Machine. It's called, what's it called now? Enviro World, I believe. It is so worth it. If you want to do something that's enclosed, it works. Do not buy that, and you will look under there and see that there's some kind of mesh thing on the bottom. Don't buy an extra one of those. It doesn't come with it. Don't get it. It's a waste of time. Okay, go. My favorite cartoon.
And now, if anybody has questions, I think Emily will open up the floor. She may have some that she's caught for us.
Yes, we do have a couple in the chat. Keely asked about chicken waste when we were talking about the acceptable and unacceptable materials.
Chicken poop is really what they call hot. It's real high in nitrogen. So you don't want to just go in there and throw it in. You can compost it to the side with some other things. You can let it sit for a while. I'm not sure because I've not had to use chicken waste. I've used horse poop. But it is hot, and you really don't want to dump a whole lot into your compost pile because it'll toast it.
And it also tends to be higher in phosphorus than in nitrogen.
Mm-hmm.
And she also asks about direct composting.
Clarify direct.
Probably what she means is within raised beds or within the garden system. I'll let her take a minute to clarify in the chat, But in the meantime, Bill asked, could you put small pieces of fish in a cold pile?
Sure, why not?
Yeah. Again, ideally, you'd want to chop things up. And when you're adding the couple of things we mentioned about the unacceptables that we use, if you were, say, when we say you can use oil, that's a little bit of kitchen oil or something like that. If you were deep frying a turkey for Thanksgiving, you don't want to go dumping all that peanut oil or whatever type of oil in at one time, just very small amounts. Same thing with meat. Fish is actually the early settlers, when they came in, found out that the Native Americans, that's how they composted, was that they would take a fish and put it in the hole in the ground and do their planting over top of it. But if you're in an area where you have skunks, raccoons, foxes, or particularly in areas, rural areas where there's bears, you want to make sure that your meat is chopped up. If you're using any kind of meat or something like that, if you put it in a blender and it's mixed with all other kind of food, very few animals are going to dig into. Well, a bear is going to dig into anything if there's food there. That's one thing you can't. But blending stuff up into really small pieces. But fish is a great source of nitrogen, so that would be very good. And the direct composting she's talking about, putting it right into your bed, that's the pit or trench composting we were talking about. So you could, again, chopping it up finely or blending it is the most ideal way to do it.
So that ties into Kathleen's question in the Q&A on what about outdoor critters, any worries and how to avoid those?
If you dig stuff in, when I dig stuff into my coal pile, I go down. Oh, you have a cat problem too, Emily.
No, I have a baby.
I dig stuff down about 6 inches. That's the reason I have a shovel that stays out there all the time. When you saw the picture that had the stake in it, the old stick or something, when I dig a hole, I dig about 6 inches down. I put the slurry in there and anything from the, like the tea bags or whatever, paper towels, then cover it back over. The animals can't smell that. The biggest problem I have right now is squirrels who go in there and think they're going to find the walnuts that they dug in there last year somehow. We've had some issues from time to time, but they come and they go. But we have not had anything major. And if you have an issue that you think you're going to have with critters, then get one of the, I still want to call it an earth machine, although it's an Enviro World machine now. Use one of those.
A any type of closed
system.
Yep.
And the one, my Lowe's machine, I call it a machine, my Lowe's container, the lid came off, blew off because we live around top of the hill. And I got a piece of plexiglass, put it on top, and I hold it down with a piece of
concrete block.
Yeah, concrete block. And that's fine. Make it easy for you. If it's not easy, you won't do it. So make sure that you can dig in your fish, you can dig in pieces of meat or whatever, but chop it up the best you can. Mix it in with something you've chopped up like orange or lemon or whatever. Or even little pieces, if you have like 1 tablespoon of salad dressing left over, you can put it in there. Everything gets blended up or chopped up. Go forth and get a Black & Decker blender and put it on your counter. It just makes it so much easier for you. But yeah, all that stuff, we have very few critters, and we have like a farm, a bunch of, even in town, running through the yard, deer especially.
We've had foxes,
yeah.
we have skunks, we have
groundhogs.
Well, groundhogs,
my favorite
for
friends.
Sure. So we have critters that do dig in piles, but Melanie's actually taken a whole turkey carcass and buried it in our bed, and we have some feral cats. None of them seem to get into it once it's mixed in there, but if you have something you're particularly concerned about, use a closed composting system. But if you have bears in the area, that's kind of all bets are off with that.
Yeah,
one.
concrete block building would only be the only way you can compost with a bear. So, but living in town, we don't have to worry about that.
Hopefully.
Emily, you're muted. She's still muted. Why is she muted? No. Now I can. Your battery died?
So Paula asked in the beginning, you showed a picture with a stick, Melanie. I think she's talking about your cold pile. You
Right.
said it was to measure, but she wants clarification on what you're measuring, and also produce that has been cooked, leftovers, are they okay to add to the pile?
The stick is what I use just to mark the area where I need to dig next time. That's all. It's just I picked up a big.
Yeah, she just goes around the pile to mark where she last was, Paula.
No, that's it.
Cooked food, people rumor around that you can't use cooked food to compost. Don't know why they say that, but cooked food is fine to compost. There's no problem with that. The microbes and everything is going to break that down. It's not going to cause any problems with that.
Just make sure you use more browns, because the thing with the cooked food that people get all upset about is because it's wetter. And just add more brown stuff, more leaves and things when you're mixing it up, and then that will eliminate the problem. But yeah, why not cook food? The critters in there are going, I don't care if it's cooked, you know.
Dave also asked about deer waste and cardboard ashes, and if cardboard ashes would be considered a brown.
Cardboard ashes?
The ashes, ashes are not a brown. Ashes are no problem. You really don't want to put ashes in compost because they are not really going to benefit one way or the other. Ashes are fine. Wood ashes. You don't want to put charcoal ashes, but wood ashes, paper and cardboard is fine to to spread or to mix with your compost as an additive to when you're putting it in the garden. But you wouldn't want to compost with ashes. That's gonna not do anything.
Okay. The question was about deer poop?
Dave, do you mean deer waste as in poop or in waste as in carcass?
Oh, but entrails and stuff like that.
That one I don't know.
I'll let him come back around to that. Keely answered our question about, sorry if you can hear my office mate here, posting within the bed. She says, correct, she has 6-inch PVC pipe in the middle of direct beds, capped with holes around the bottom.
Yeah, to allow air in. Yeah, that's for anything. I've used hardware cloth and made a little ring to put in to aerate with. But you can use the actually the pipe you buy at hardware store or home supply store. That's a drainage pipe that has the holes already in it. You can use that, or if you want to buy a whole pipe and drill the holes yourself, you can do that. Yep.
Emily, you're muted.
Dave does clarify he means deer poop.
Yeah, deer manure would be the same as any other manure. There's different manures have different levels. Like say, chicken is one of the hottest manures, high nitrogen. So you would have to use a lot of leaves or straw or something, the browns to compensate for that. I'm not sure exactly where the deer manure would fall in that list. I would say it's probably in the middle of the nitrogen level, but yeah, you could mix that in and use that because it's an herbivore. Anything that eats leaves and plants and stuff, their manure is fine. Things like llama poo, you can,
oh my gosh,
that's so good, you don't even have to really compost that. You can put that directly in your garden bed. So but things like horse and cow, you would want to mix that and let that set for a while before you put it in the garden. Chicken, that would be the least desirable. You wouldn't want to put that directly in there. And also, if you compost it, you want to have a lot of browns to cut that down. Yes.
The llama poo we have in the class that we teach, that's our shameless promotion. The class that we teach, one of the activities I do is I give you 4 containers that all have different kinds of animal poo in them, and you need to tell me which one's which. And one of those is llama poo. And then you get to take something home if you want to. But llama poo is so cool because you just can put it right in your garden. Unfortunately, it doesn't, because it's pelletized. It takes a little bit longer for the pellets to fall apart, but that's not a big deal. And it's really nice because it is easy, like bunny poo that you can just put right in your beds and not worry about it.
And people that raise llamas, it's one of those things, you can usually get free cow manure, horse manure, chicken manure. People that raise llamas, they sell their manure.
You have to buy it.
They don't give that away unless you're awful good friends with them.
I have to go and beg and look pitiful, my school teacher's voice going, well, can I have a couple of buckets of that to use for my class? And I'm sure,
Just a clarification, while I say this, could you go ahead and put in the chat the address to order for the EnviroWorld from Frederick County, and make sure you change that to go to everybody. If you are seeking to if you are getting manure, hay, or straw from cattle or horse or any type of livestock, you want to make sure that those fields where the animal's grazing or where that hay has been harvested is not treated with certain classes of herbicides. The gray ones are the common herbicides. There's certain active ingredients. I can't pronounce most herbicide, with most pesticide active ingredients, but you always want to ask if it's been treated, if so, with what, because there's certain classes of herbicides that don't harm the animal, but they're used on certain broadleaf weeds in pasture or hay fields. They will carry through into manure. The residuals will carry through into hay and straw, and it will harm your garden. That herbicide's used to kill broadleaf weeds. Most of our plants in our garden are broadleaf, so it will do some damage. So it's always something to be mindful of.
That has happened with some people that were organic gardeners.
Yes.
They looked and like half of my garden is dying. Why? Because they bought something that went straight through the critter. So
It's something.
What goes in must come out.
Yeah.
Know your source.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that because it's something we cover in our larger classes. We actually show a demonstration of how you test your compost to make sure that it doesn't have any persistent herbicides in it that do not break down. Even commercial places that sell compost and sell mulch are supposed to test that material to make sure they do not have herbicide in them. And that happened up in New England with a large company that the landscaping companies bought material from them, spread them around people's yards, and all of a sudden their shrubs and bushes and trees were dying. And they found out that one of these persistent herbicides had gotten in and contaminated, and it hadn't been had time to fully break down. So that is something you do want to, if you're getting, as Melanie mentioned, if you don't have enough grass and you're collecting grass from a neighbor or something, to make sure what they've sprayed or that something else that you're getting to use, like say manures, that what they've fed on or what they've had to do that. So that's good.
Just a couple more questions. Linda asks, with a tumbler type composter, how often should you turn it? How long does it take to compost? And essentially, how patient does she need to be? She has not been chopping up the food waste. And should she be adding water to the tumbler now and then to keep it moist?
Yeah, with the tumblers, tumblers seem to be the most challenging way to compost, though. People that once they learn the method, as far as first to talk about the moisture with any compost pile, when you reach in and grab a handful of it, you squeeze it. If water squeezes out of it, then it's way too wet and you need to let it dry out, or to add some brown, something to help dry it out some. If you take it and hold it in your hand and think of a snowball, and that if it's a real wet snow and you make and it's almost an ice ball, that's the too wet. If you make it and we have a real cold, super dry snow, and you take try to make a snowball and you open your hand up and the snow just fluffs out, it's too dry, and your compost be the same thing. It should be, you make it squeeze it into a ball and it's sort of formed there, but when you poke it, it'll break apart, that it's moist, not super wet, but not super dry. So you just have to check. The one thing with tumblers, because there's air all around and they're subject to, particularly if they're in the sun, they're going to get heat all around them. They're going to tend to dry a lot faster and need more water with that. And then chopping, no matter what type of composting, whether it's in a cold pile, whether it's in any of the type of bins or the tumbler, the finer it's chopped, the quicker it's going to break down and make it. So if you have everything perfect, that 4 or 6 weeks you can actually have compost, but most cases you're going to say it's going to take about 2 to 3 months to realistically get your compost.
And turn it, if you don't turn it every day, turn it like every other day. Those 2 little ones that we have, I turn them every time I walk out there, and that might be every 2 days, but those only contain chopped up leaves and chopped up grass. There's no food stuff put in there. But yeah, you need to keep tumbling it because it needs to be aerated, since it's in this really tight enclosed space. And when you open the top, then you're aerating too, letting the ambient air in, and then you roll it again. So those are kind of tough to work with.
But once you learn how to it,
Yeah.
like I say, they work really well.
We had someone one time, she said, I don't want to give it up. I said, well, then don't. Are you happy with it? Yes. Then stay with it. Do. How's your
lots of really great questions here, and a lot of, as everybody will know, a lot of trial and error associated with composting. So I have 2 more questions related to composting. Then Paul, I'm going to jump back over and get your question because I can answer that one. Mary Pat asks, hi Mary Pat, nice to see you on all these Zoom meetings. How often should you turn a cold pile? A clarification on that. And then Bill asks about ink on newspaper and shredded paper.
What was the thing about shred? Oh, cold pile. Oh, you get paper. I get cold pile, he gets paper. I don't turn a cold pile. That's why I'm a lazy composter. Well, you want to answer that? Except when I dig it and I sift it. So after I work my way up and down, up and down, up and down, then I let it sit over the winter time. And then in the spring, I can go in and sift it. So the only time I'm really digging any of that, I'm mixing things up then. But that's it. The blessing of a cold pile is you do not have to do that. The time for it can be used in Rick's thing, but I don't need it in mine. The only work I really do with that cold pile is when I sift it. So you don't really need to turn it unless you really want to see what's going on. If you want to see what's going on, get that shovel in there and flip it over and see what's going on.
And the question about the print on paper, the paper you want to use is any soft paper, like your newspaper is fine. The ink on virtually all paper now is soy-based, particular your newspapers, including your colored print and your comics pages, things like that. That's fine to use. You don't want to use glossy paper or photo type paper, anything like that, because those are really high in clay content and do not break down very well. And cardboard's the same thing. If you're using shredded cardboard, some cardboard has a waxy print on it. That layer you would want to peel off because it would take too long for it to break down.
And also the tapes, because when we break down boxes to put down in our pathways before we put mulch on top of it, pull off those, the tape that's on there, because if not, it will come back up at some point and you're going, oh, what is this? Ooh, it's tape. Get rid of it up front.
All that great Amazon tape that I have in abundance from all my boxes.
And we have
And-
one last question.
To finish off, well, a couple just came in. Paul asked, and I'll take this one. This question may not be appropriate, but why does chicken litter currently spread on fields have such an odor? Paul, the ammonia that's released from chicken manure is what you're smelling. So when we apply poultry litter, most of that organic material is more of a slower release, but dependent on the storage method of manure, the ammonia is released into the atmosphere, and that's what you smell. So that's the nitrogen that's breaking down. It smells great, doesn't it? It smells like spring to me. From Alan and Marina, will coffee filters break down? Excellent question. And then I just a couple comments that everybody's enjoyed the cats and the baby in and out of the video chats. So will coffee filters break down? That's the question.
I'm not sure about that because we don't use coffee filters. And I will have to, that one I'm going to have to research, because I don't know if the coffee filters are exactly like the tea bags and there's some kind of plastic additive in that to help it hold its shape.
Along those lines, and another thing, if you look at there are some that will say they're compostable because they are primarily paper, but some will have the same thing Melanie mentioned about with the tea bags, that they're intertwined with a really fine nylon mesh or something to hold them together. So you'd have to watch that. And then the other caveat, when you look at not only coffee filters, but like cups and paper plates and all that are advertised as compostable, you need to look at the really fine print that says in a commercial composting facility. Right. That we've taken them, and even in my hot piles that get say 159, 58 degrees, they will not break down. In the cold pile left for a year, they don't really break down. They have to be in a commercial pile that gets really hot and is turned and tumbled commercially before they'll break down. So any of those things you see advertised in the grocery stores or anywhere else that says, it's compostable, the fine print on them always says, and I think that includes your coffee store, coffee cups. I'm not going to promote a brand, but the popular brands that say their cups are compostable. Commercial facility is most of them. Residentially, the designs of most of those do not work, unfortunately.
I will say this one for Hefty, and I bought the plates just because it said, oh, Hefty plates can be compostable. I took it, shredded it up, and this has been several years ago, and put it in 3 different places in my coal pile, and it actually fell apart. It was not, now it does not have wax on it. Keep that in mind. There's no thin wax covering. But again, like Rick said, read the fine print, because it may be fine in Cam Tab's place, but not in your compost pile.
Excellent points and great information. This is a lot, just like all the sessions, we're giving a very condensed version of a topic we could spend a really long time talking about. So I think Melanie and Rick are 2 presenters that do an excellent job on getting the bare bones information. And I always enjoy all these great questions in the chat. Provide a great opportunity for some.
Everybody had very good questions.
Yes.
And unfortunately, that there are a lot of topics or things that we would cover in a longer program, but even then there's things that questions people have. So thank everybody for their questions.
Go forth and compost.
Couldn't say better myself. Everybody have a great evening. Thanks for tuning in, and we hope to see you next week for landscaping.
Thanks, Emily.
Thank you, Emily.
Thanks to everybody.